Everyone prepared for today?
Yes.
They seem like they mean it. I don't know, do you think?
A lot of trepidation, it seems to me. A lot of worry.
I think that's better than if you were just like, oh yeah, we're fine, and then at least they're aware that it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Today might be a challenge. We also might get a bit personal today. That's usually a challenge for people. After we get a bit personal, generally people don't like us anymore. So see how you go. All right. Our subject matter that I would like to talk about today is my fight with God. Sound like a decent enough subject? And we go, what fight? I'm not in a fight with God. What are you talking about? What's wrong with you? Yeah. The problem that most of us have is if you look at the questions, many of the questions you asked yesterday, can you see that many of them were based around you feel that what God has created is unfair? Can you see that? A lot of you feel the unfairness of the way things have been created. So an example of that is when I incarnate, I pick up the multi-generational sin through the experience of my forefathers. And most people, when we tell them that, they think, that's so unfair. Right? We should be able to start with a clean slate every time, somehow. And so for the majority of us, we don't realise, but we have a lot of feelings that God's system of things is unfair. And so when we look at God, and there's myself, and remember we need to get some perspective, me, right? And of course that's not in perspective, is it? Because obviously God's infinite and I'm very finite. What we often believe when we look at God is we look at God through all of the injuries and all of the feelings we carry. So we carry with us, because of the different injuries and emotions we have and different demands we have and the different feelings we have about self-determination, my right to set my own laws, my right to live my life how I see fit, all of these kind of things. We look at God and we see God, if we see God at all, and most people a lot of people on earth now are going into complete denial that there's even a God, right? So for most people it's like they're really in a state where they are in complete denial that God exists. So they're completely cut off from even the idea or concept of a God. But those people who are believing in God or do believe in a God also are quite cut off from the personality and nature of God. So they believe God is an ogre, a mysterious, unable to ever be known, unable to ever be grasped by a human, unable to ever really have a relationship with. God's just sort of this, if they believe in God at all, God is just this being that really, for most people on earth, have no impact on their life or barely any impact on their life at all. And you might say, well, what about all of those people who like pray 5 times a day or, go to church every morning or all of those kind of things? Well, they don't believe in God, do they? They believe in their version of God, right? Which is very different than believing in God. So if you look at all of the religions of earth, so if you look at religion, the majority of religions are all about having a concept of God of some kind. So in the Hindu faith, for example, there's a concept that there's many gods, right? And the Hindu faith has had a large influence on the New Age movement, you could call it, because the New Age movement basically says we are all gods. We are all a part of God. And then you've also got the Buddhist movement, right, which also has a concept that we are God and there is no actual creator, right? And that sort of feeds into that New Age movement, which is an offshoot of the merging of those two things as well. Then you look at the Christian movement, the so-called Christian, because it's not Christian, they believe in a triune God for the most part, like three gods in one, like God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Not God at all, but actually a concept of God that's being created. And they also believe, of course, that you have to be, just let me have a cough. You have to be a Christian in order to be saved by God, saved from your sin. Now, that basically says that nobody else can ever remove their sin. It also, the Christian movement also fundamentally believes that you're a flawed creation, which doesn't say a lot of good things about God, does it? If you think about it. If we were created flawed on purpose, that's pretty mean. If you think about it, wouldn't you try, if you could create something perfect and you decide to create something that's not perfect, that'd be a pretty mean thing to do. So the Christian God and also the Muslim God, very mean gods, very punishing gods as well. So you got obviously the Muslim faith or Islam. They believe in one God. In fact, they're the closest in regard to, the actual concept of God, that there is one, although there are some Christian faiths who do believe in one God. There's, I think, two Christian faiths who believe in God being, and the Holy Spirit and Jesus not being a part of God. But for the most part, Christian faith is a triune God. But Islam is like one God, right? Allah, one God. And anybody like myself or Muhammad, prophets of God, people who talk about God, which is a better concept, but their imaginings of God being punishing, like many of them pray 5 times a day and then pick up a gun straight after prayer. So that is pretty strange, isn't it? If you think about how much is that, how much is their image of God now modifying their behaviour. So these religions, and by the way, I would include atheism as a religion. Because atheism is just another concept of God, which is that God doesn't exist. Right? So you've also got agnosticism, which is, I don't know whether God exists. Right? But if you examine all of those concepts, and of course there are many more, Taoist and so forth, there are many, many more religions. In fact, I think by last count there was something like 9,000 religions, of which there's something like 200 major ones, who more than 1 million adherents, and then heaps of thousands and thousands of smaller religions where they create their own concept of God. And that's the trouble, is that we're all going around creating our own concept of God, right, in this process. So by creating our own concept of God, there's a number of things that happens emotionally and intellectually to our thinking and our feelings. One of those things is, if our concept of God matches a religious faith, unless that religious faith has an accurate concept of God, we do not have a proper concept of God. So if we're a member of a religious faith that has an inaccurate view of God, then obviously we're going to not ourselves have a proper concept of God either, because we're adhering to the religious faith. Now, every religious faith creates a concept of God, or a concept of no God, in the case of the atheism faith, and I call it a faith in like as just a general term, but it's not really faith, not the kind of faith we've been talking about. Faith is based on truth, and many of these things are faith based on nothing, based on the imaginings, for the large part, of either spirits who created some of these faiths or humans who created some of these faiths. Humans just come up with a concept. Sometimes it was spirit channeled, and other times it was directly from a human, and they come up with a concept that they feel that they could have usually some power with. And then, of course, they impose that concept, and a lot of times it just depends on your family-based injuries as to which faith you will accept and which faith you grew up with in your environment as to which faith you would accept. So if I grew up in India, good chance that I'll be a Hindu. But if I grew up in like Southern America, good chance I'll be a Christian or an atheist. You know, if I grow up in Australia, good chance I'm an agnostic. I got no idea. You know, because Australians like having no idea about much at all. If we can get away with it, you know, it means we don't have to make any decisions and choices, right? So, but you can see in each case, it's a lot to do with the society in which I incarnated into, the family tree in which I incarnated into. A lot of times that's determining our future relationship with God. Now, already these religions are creating a fight with God because the concept of God is in error and they want to retain the concept of God that they have. So a common concept of God for these two faiths, Christian and Islamic faiths, is if a person doesn't believe what I believe, then I have the right to take up arms against that person and force them into what I believe. Now, historically, the Christian faith has done that for nearly 1,700 years. And many of the wars all through the Dark Ages were caused by the Christian faith doing that. Right? And then, of course, there were reactions to that. The Islamic faith really began sort of in the 600, after my time, 600 years after the first century. And again, it also, although the faith itself had some good tenets of love and care and compassion for people, there is also contained in the holy books that drive these faiths some justifications for war. Now, obviously, that's not in agreement with God. God doesn't want any of his children, just like you, when you have your own children, you don't like them fighting. So too, he doesn't like any of his children fighting, right? And yet these faiths, based upon a concept of God, are encouraging it at times. And historically have encouraged it to the extent that there's a genocide of millions as a result of that encouragement. Right? And this has continued all the way through history, right up until very recently, and even currently. Many concepts of God are interfering with how humanity lives a life on earth. And the question then becomes, well, that's religion. There is literally no religion on earth who believes the truth about God. Right? So that's a problem, because if there's no religion on earth teaching a truth about God, then how am I ever meant to learn the truth about God? It's going to be difficult, isn't it? Because the very people who say they have a relationship with God are teaching falsehood about God. They are actually blaspheming God, actually. They're misrepresenting God. And so, for that reason, many of them, obviously God's laws are trying to correct them. And of course, all of these religious faiths, to one extent or another, are in a fight with God. They don't want the correction. They don't want to see anything as being different to what they believe it is. Now, let's get a bit more personal. That's groups of people. What about me? What about me? Let's look at me now. How do I fight God? So we see with religion, there's a lot of misconceptions about God that are in opposition to God. There are also a lot of actions taken in religion that are in opposition to love and therefore in opposition to God. But what about me? Because you see, a lot of times I have a tendency to blame everybody else for the terrible condition of the world. And I say to myself, but I'm only one of 8 billion on this planet. It really doesn't matter what I believe, but, it does matter what all those groups of people are doing and believe, and how terrible are they all, But we rarely look at ourselves and see what we're doing, and particularly what we're doing with God. So what are you doing with God? Now, yesterday, the questions demonstrate, you can see that we have an internal emotional argument going on with God for the most part. The emotional argument is, I don't like what you've done. So we're basically saying to God, I don't like what you've done, right? You've made a crappy world for me to come into. And we, of course, don't appreciate all the beautiful gifts that we've been given in this world when we have that attitude. And so we think we come into this crappy world and we just have a crappy time of it, on earth as well. And then we die, and then we're so scared of dying, so we try to live as long as we possibly can. And then, of course, we die anyway because none of us can live, longer than our condition allows. And so we die. And then because nobody comes back, or nobody very convincing anyway, comes back and talks to me about what's afterwards, So what am I meant to believe? There's people who come back and say, oh, you don't have to worry about anything, everything's fine now, we know everything now, and there's reincarnation and that works, and you're just going to come back to Earth. And a lot of you, if you think about reincarnation, you go, what? Why would I want to come back to Earth? The last time was bad enough. And sort of like, so we have all these kind of attitudes as well. And so a lot of us get into this state where we just become so frustrated about finding the truth, and instead of looking maybe at the means by which we're trying to discover truth, or instead of looking at the method we're using to discover truth, or instead of looking at, love as a governing factor and then trying to bring everything in harmony with love, we just give up and we go, what's the point? Let's just try our best to live the best life I believe I should live, not anybody else, but I believe I should live, and suck the life out of the planet while I'm doing it generally. That's, everybody in history has done that. Why can't I? Everybody in history has, whenever they had resources at their means, they used them all. Whenever they had the ability to destroy something for their own benefit, they did. So why can't I? Right? It's very unfair if I can't do that, is almost what we believe. And so we have all of these justifications, internal justifications, as to why we should forget about the whole concept of God, even if there is one, and just live out our life on earth. And then we pass. And because many of us sort of believe there's probably, and don't have a lot of conviction that there's much after passing, we sort of believe and we become very focused on living in the physical. So my problem becomes, I become very physical in my orientation towards life. So I barely think about spiritual matters. And when I say barely, if you think about spiritual matters, I say 1 hour a day, that's pretty unique. But when you think about 1 hour a day, that's only 1/24th of the day. So it's not very often. Can you see? And the average person probably doesn't think about God or spiritual matters or love or, developing themselves in love or becoming a more loving person like for an hour a day. Most people would be lucky on earth to think about it for 5 minutes a day, right? And so we become very physically focused, and as we said yesterday, very sensorially focused. Like we start just using all of our senses to discover things. And we also shut down the very thing we've been created with. Remember, me is not this body, not the spirit one either, but a half of a soul. And we shut down all of the senses of the soul and become physically oriented in the world we live. And we also shut down any what I would classify as spiritual development or development in love. We become very focused on selfishness rather than love, getting what I want for me. So that's often where I stand when it comes to development. So I'm also now looking at God and criticising through my actions. I'm basically criticising everything he's done. I'm basically saying, well, you haven't made it clear to me that you exist, so why should I believe in you? You haven't made it clear to me what I should do with my life, so why should I do anything that you say? You haven't made it clear to me what the rules are, so I'm going to act like there's no rules. I don't know about you, but driving around in Austria, I sort of feel the same to some degree. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but when you get in the car, it's really interesting, is it? There's a speed limit sign, 80 or whatever, and you drive at 80, and everybody's going, whoa, 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 like past you like nobody's business, like 100 k's or more, and you're going, I thought the speed limit here was 80. So it doesn't seem to be 80, but and then it says /80. What does that mean? It's sort of like, now I've got to guess what the speed limit is. It's not 80. That's all I know. It's not 80. So now, when everything is so indeterminate like this, there's a tendency in you to just ignore things. Can you see that? And this is what a lot of humans have done with their relationship with God. They just sort of ignore things. Seemingly indeterminate, it seems. And so we start ignoring it. But there's a few things we need to bear in mind when we consider the earth in which we live. Humans have been on this earth for around about 165 or so, thereabouts, 1,000 years. During that time, they have more and more detuned away from God and the structure. And in that 165,000 years, we have terraformed the planet, literally terraformed it. And do you know what I mean by terraforming? It means imposing the human desire for everything to look different, and I terraform the planet, I rip out the trees, I rip out the environment, I kill off everything. It's really interesting walking here in Austria because everything looks so pretty, like green and lots of water. It's just really great. But there's no animals. There's no birds. When I say none, compared to where we live, it's just none. Like we're lucky on a walk to see 2 birds, even though we walk for 1 hour and a half in the bush, up in the mountains. And that's a demonstration of how far humans have terraformed this planet without realising it, without understanding. And so the only animals we actually see are domestic. Dogs, cats, cows, with bells. And if I was a cow, that would drive me absolutely bonkers. But anyway, imagine having a bell going clang, clang, clang around your neck all day. It's terrible. There's no compassion for the animals either in this place because we have become so self-absorbed that we don't even care about the environment really in which we live anymore. And we're totally dedicated to really just what I would call virtue signalling ourselves to make out we're nice people, when actually there's been 160,000 years of damage that each generation sort of feels like, well, the other people did damage, so why can't I? Want to say something about that? Or question something about that?
since the 1800s, we lost 80% of all the bird species in like Europe, like all the mass of all the birds.
Yeah.
It's like 80%, and I don't know what happened before that, but
That's right.
even that is like it's immense.
It's massive.
Yeah.
You're talking like, it's interesting at home we're doing environmental programs to improve the environment, and you know, part of the you could say the organisation structure of God's Way, which is an organisation Mary and I are members of, which we were the founding members of. We've been doing these environmental projects, and each environmental project we do, it's amazing how much life comes back. Like the earth and the things in it want to recover, but humans are just not letting it happen. We're just not. We're not even in tune enough to let that happen. And that's because we're so focused on the physical, but we're also focused on something else, and that is avoidance of pain. Right? And for most of us, emotion is pain. So you could almost say avoidance of emotion. Right? So we're so focused on the physical and also on avoiding emotion that we end up in this state that everything we're choosing to do is, how can I get away? How can I get more comfort? How can I get away with not having to feel some pain? So the interesting thing about God's creation is God's created a system that has a pain loop in it. So every time we break the law, there's meant to be some pain, so that you know you've broken the law, right? But when we are in the state of avoidance of pain, we detune from the pain. And so now the feedback mechanism doesn't work for us anymore. We're ignoring the feedback mechanism, that one of the feedback mechanisms that God has created. Of course, it's only one, because God's also created in the soul with a conscience, which bothers us every time we do something unloving, and yet we eventually completely detune from that as well, to the point where we don't even listen to it at all, right? The average person on earth acts as if they have no conscience. It's interesting because historically, through millennia, the humans, philosophers, have had fascination with the concept of the conscience. Well, where does this... They've always been thinking, where does this morality, you know, what's right, what's wrong, come from? Because it seems like most people in society do feel what's right and wrong. They do have the feeling of what is right and wrong, or, you know, in terms of determining it. And yet the average person in society generally doesn't listen unless the conscience is about something that's major. Like, should I murder somebody? Well, the average person on earth goes, no, you shouldn't murder somebody. But if you have to go to war, murder's okay. Or if you're pregnant and you don't like the father, murder's okay. In that abortion is okay. If you, you know, there are other periods of things that where we think, you know, murder is sort of justified. We just talked about religion. If somebody's got a different religious faith than mine, and they're, you know, too pushy about it, they don't shut up about it, then you can get violent with them, and to the point of murdering them if you want. There are these exceptions to the rules. So even though almost every country on earth has a law about murder, which is indicative of the human conscience at work, there are times when every country on earth says it's okay. So we're not very consistent either with the application of the law based on the conscience either. The same applies with things like rape, abuse, things like that. You know, we say that these things shouldn't happen, but they're happening all the time. So there's obviously got to be a problem with regard to the exercise of the conscience. So here I am, my focus is avoidance of pain, I'm focused on the physical, I'm avoiding my conscience, I'm avoiding the operation of my conscience, because when I break the conscience rule, the moral law, there's a guilt feeling, and most of us don't like to feel guilt. Most of us feel like guilt feels terrible, so I'm not going to feel that. And so we avoid the operation of the conscience. But the conscience is there to help you feel guilty. Guilt is an indication you know you're breaking the law. So it's a good thing to feel guilty under those circumstances. Yeah?
So when we feel guilty, we should try to really feel that guilt, and then we can make a different choice, or what?
Yeah, and what are you feeling guilty about is a good question to ask yourself, isn't it? Like, why do you feel bad? Now, there are times when you feel bad when other people just make you feel bad, and it's got nothing to do with what is right and wrong. It's got everything to do with what they think is right and wrong. But there are other times when you're just thinking by yourself, you feel like you want to take an action, or you have taken action, then you reflect about that action in your life with no pressure from external, and you can still feel bad. And now, under those circumstances, you need to be a bit more sensitive and go, oh, why am I feeling bad? There's got to be some reason, you know. And actually, it's the operation of the law of compensation, trying to help you feel guilty so you know you did something wrong. In the spirit world, in the hells, that's what the majority of people in the hells are actually doing, connecting to their guilt about all the things they did wrong. Yeah? So it's better to do that now, but the average person on earth doesn't do that. Because the average person on earth is in this fight about everything with God. So let's look at where we're fighting, shall we? Can you come up with some ideas of, if you're have an honest look at yourself and then say, these are the areas that I'm sort of fighting. So can we do that? So I want to start. So you're on up the back there. Just keep your hand up there. And down the front here. Yeah.
Nellie. Nellie or Eric? Nellie.
No, just Nellie.
Yep.
Yep. So you on?
I know for myself that I've got this belief that sin is freedom.
Sin is?
Freedom.
Freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's a good acknowledgement.
A lot of us also have the belief sin is my only source of pleasure.
Well, I think that just the fact that you're calling it sin is further developed than the average person. Because the average person thinks sin does not exist. That's how far we go, right? There's no law, in other words. Yeah.
I let myself go into emotional overwhelm.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Like, not long ago I've been praying, like wanting to know truth and more desire for connection with God.
Yep.
And like a week after, like things happened into my life where I got emotionally overwhelmed, like it was a lot. I felt it was a lot.
I see what you're saying. Like, you ask for some truth,
Yeah,
you get some, and you go, I don't want that much.
I don't want that. So I completely blocked after that.
Yeah, that's very true. So that is really saying, if I have to feel a bad emotion, then I don't want to know. Yeah. Isn't it? That's really saying, it's avoidance of emotional pain, but it's really saying, I get to the point where I can cope with so much, and then beyond that, all bets are off now, I'm giving up, or I just don't want to know anymore.
It's too much to ask.
Too much to ask for. Yeah. So we're basically saying being loving is too much sometimes. Like, learning love is too much sometimes. So how do I put that in a few words? I think what you said, it's really like, I should never have to be overwhelmed, isn't it? I should always have everything in control.
It should feel manageable.
I should always feel manageable. Yeah. So should we call that, I should be able to stay in control?
Yeah, and I don't trust God also in that place.
Good, yep. Yeah. So control is
reasonable. Well, yeah.
We call it that. If we come down to here,
Eric,
and so Eric, and then up the back there. Yes,
I fight with my soulmate, not in the real sense, but I don't want to meet the person. I just don't want to have one. I want to choose by myself.
Okay. When it comes to love, I want to choose. In other words, I want what I think is good. And I don't care what God thinks is good. God doesn't know what he's doing. Like, I know what I'm doing. I know what I think is good. And that's really saying God didn't know what he was doing creating my soulmate for me. It's better that I can choose for myself. But I also, it's interesting, it's not just with soulmates. I want to choose what laws to agree with and what ones not to. I want to choose how I live my own life. I don't want to have to be governed by some kind of guiding force or guiding principles. I want to be able to just choose. In other words, I want to exercise my will towards what I believe is freedom. Right? Is really what we're doing. Yeah. So out the back, thanks, Sinisa.
I want to take a shortcut to God.
Okay.
I want to avoid all that work, with emotions. I'm lazy, but
easy.
Yeah.
I want it to be easy.
Yeah. To get in his office, her office, and said, "Who's my soulmate? What is my mission here?
Yeah.
Tell me."
Yeah, and I want to be able to say, "Who's my soulmate?" And he says Mary. Okay, great, I know now. Right, but do we really even want that? Because the majority of us go, "I didn't want it to be Mary. I wanted to be somebody else." So we often we feel like, do I even want to know what the truth is? For the most part, we find the truth confronting. We want the truth to be easy.
Yeah.
Right? But see, even that concept is flawed, isn't it? Because if we've had thousands and thousands of years of sin, then what that probably means is that sin, we feel, is easy. Right? And then we feel truth is hard. So when we talk about truth, a lot of the times people don't want the truth. You think about it in relationships even. Sometimes like you see partners and one is unfaithful. The other one doesn't even want to know. You tell them and, "Why did you tell me? It was better when I didn't know." And it's because we want easy with a lot of things, isn't it? Relationships, friendships, life, easy. Yeah. Up the back in the...
I want love, but I don't want to work for it. Like, it should be easy, like you said. But, like, I want to feel the love and also give love, but I don't want to feel the emotions that will bring me there.
Yeah, we've got to be careful here, don't we? Because actually love is very easy. Yeah. And it's one of the easiest things to do, actually, is to love somebody. But when you've got sins that operate in disharmony with love or that are focusing you towards selfishness, then, of course, love becomes a lot harder, right? And so you could say, me saying I want really what I want, right? Rather than going, well, what's best for all of us, we go, what's best for me? And also, I am not very good at determining what's best for me. You have a look at your own lives. Most of you are not very good at it. Isn't that true? Not very good at determining what's best for you. If what's best for you is what you've got, how many of you are happy with that? Not many that are happy, is there? If you look at the world, how many people are actually happy? Happy with their relationships, happy with their friendships, happy. Most of the time there's problems and all we do is compromise about them. So in a relationship, in fact, if you go to a relationship therapist, has any of you tried that? Gone to a relationship therapist to get some help? One of the very first things I will recommend to you is compromise. Right? And that's like recommending something that's going to kill your relationship even more as a solution to your relationship problems. And compromise doesn't work, particularly when you start compromising love. Things don't work. You can't compromise love in a relationship, but see, the average person thinks, I need safety. You need, what is it you need? Sex. Like, so I need sex, Mary needs safety. Mary gives me sex, I give her safety. We're in a good relationship. It's a terrible relationship, right? If it's like that. So we want easy, but we also want only what we want. Is another part of the problem. So
I don't have faith that God is good, and I kind of want proof of that before I have a relationship with him or her.
yeah, how about God wanting proof that you're good?
Well, he can see everything I do, so he can make up his own mind.
So he already knows you're bad. Is that what you're saying?
He knows everything about me, but
But it's interesting, isn't it? We demand things of God that we don't demand of ourselves. So it's sort of like, I want proof from God that God's good. And I think there's huge amounts of evidence that God is good. But what about all the evidence that you're good? Are you willing to provide that? You know, a lot of times we're not, are we? We just say, no, I am what I am and I'm going to be what I am. See, a lot of times when it comes to our relationship with God, we really don't want what we think we want from God. So an example of that is, do I keep going with that, or do I have this little segue?
Have a segue.
Have a
come back.
segue.
Yeah.
I'll come back to that. Fundamentally, our problems with our life boil down to a couple of fundamental things that we're not doing very well. And the very first thing that we're not doing very well is truth. When we are not focused on what is the truth of the universe, the truth of how everything works, when we are not focused on that, we are going to start to get ourselves in a position now where we enjoy the error. We enjoy the lie, right? Now, when it comes to truth, the opposite of truth, obviously, is the error. Actually, blue is good, red is bad. Right, so I'll write error in red. So almost everything you will get to do in your future life will fundamentally boil down to the battle between truth and error. And most of us think that our problems in life are very complicated. We believe that, the problems of the world are complicated. But they're actually not very complicated at all, because they fundamentally boil down to, you could say, the battle or the war between truth and error. Now, truth does not battle. It just presents itself and leaves it be. Does that make sense to you? Truth does not battle at all. But error fights to the death for itself to exist.
It fights for itself as truth, doesn't it?
As truth. It presents itself as truth, and if it can't present itself as truth, it attacks the truth, and if it doesn't attack the truth, it fights the truth until it can kill the truth. That's what it does. Alec?
So I wrote down yesterday, and that's my question, is that right? I wrote down, I don't believe that the small changes in the course of a day I make are changing my life. That's why I don't choose to change those behaviors. Those little things where you said yesterday they have a big outcome.
Yep.
And I often choose not to change little things because I think they don't have a big outcome or don't really change myself and my loving behavior.
Yep. But what bearing does that have on the conversation about truth and error?
You just mentioned something like that, and I thought...
Well, yesterday I did, yep.
Okay.
But there is a bearing on what you're saying on truth and error, but I don't know if you've joined the dots with it, though.
Okay.
Yeah. What is the bearing? So there's truth in everything. Little things, big things, there's truth in everything, isn't there? There's also potentially error in everything. in the sense there's little things where you could be in error, big things where you can be in error. There's potentially error in everything as well. Now, if error has the attitude, I'm going to fight for myself, then can you see in the course of a day, even if there's a little thing that comes along, error is going to say, but I like my little thing. So an example of that, I raised this with the Belgium group. Example of that is, how many of you love coffee? Yeah? Drink a coffee. How many of you, keep your hands up, how many of you love chocolate? So keep chocolate, so now we're fair viewers. How many of you love tea rather than coffee? But keep your hand up if you love coffee, tea, chocolate. So now we're getting to meet like most of the audience. All right. How many of you? These are. How many of you still like eat meat? So keep your hands up. How many of you still keep your hands up with any of these are true? Is basically what I'm saying. How many of you still smoke? How many of you still drink alcohol? How many of you still can you see? Everything I've just mentioned is an addiction. Every single one of them. By the way, every one of those addictions are having a major, major impact on the environment of the planet. What they're doing with tea and coffee is they're clearing whole swathes of environment that are high value environment, like we're talking, rainforest, subtropical and tropical rainforests and everything, high value environments, lots of water being used, and turning them into a monoculture. And then on top of that, do you think anything that was there in those places before can survive? Of course not. They don't have anywhere to build a nest. They don't have anywhere to lay their eggs. They don't have anywhere to have progeny. They don't have any safety. They don't have any security. They don't have any food anymore because they can't eat coffee beans. And so they will die off, right? We don't understand that even our tiny little addictions that we think, it's just a cup of coffee, or it's just a little bit of chocolate, or it's just a whatever, Alcohol, in Australia with alcohol, they're clearing away almost every other production of food in some big farming areas and just planting vineyards. Planting vineyards, more and more vineyards. You look over some countries here in Europe, everywhere you drive, just vineyards. You look through, sort of northern Italy, France, vineyards. There's fruit trees occasionally here and there, but vineyards mostly because we like our drink, right, as a human population. And that's because we like avoiding emotions. Drinking alcohol helps us avoid things. So we like our error. And the error is going to fight for itself. And even in little things, Alex, like a cup of coffee, a bit of chocolate, whatever, we're not thinking, what's the right thing to do here? What we're thinking is, what do I like doing here? That's really what we're thinking.
Yeah, and it's similar to, I think I said to you in private, Alex, we get ingrained in these things that we each, if you look at even individual actions or interactions with people, and we often think, that was just a small thing, but it's actually a pattern of behaviour, or which is really a pattern of managing emotion that helps us to avoid truth on a day-to-day basis. And that's why we end up, when we start our emotional work, going, I don't even know what I feel. I don't know why I can't connect to God. It's worse than that, because not only do we not know what we feel, we don't even want to know what we feel. And those behaviours and those patterns they're all there to support us not knowing what we feel, not knowing truth. So error fights in a lot of different ways, right? And one way is complete denial of truth. Another way is re-imaging itself. You could say creating an illusion of truth. Right? An example of that is recycling is an illusion of truth. Microphone.
Oh, sorry. So are you suggesting that we give up coffee, tea, wine or whatever? Or is it just the overindulgence of those things? Is one cup of coffee a day okay, or one square of chocolate, or whatever?
Right, you have a good question. Put
it on the board, Jesus, the set of rules.
Yeah, what's your set of rules? I know most of you would like a set of rules, but love, let's look at love. if I love the environment and I think about 8 billion people having 1 cup of coffee a day, how many coffee plants are going to be required for my 1 cup of coffee a day? If 8 billion people do it. It's the same, if there's 8 billion people eating meat, how much more of the earth is going to have to get destroyed for those 8 billion people to eat meat every meal? If there's 8 billion people on earth eating chocolate, where are we going to get it from? Like 1 bar of chocolate is a whole tree, whole cocoa tree, which takes 1 whole day to harvest and so you've got to also bear in mind that person who's doing that is earning less than $1 a day doing it. He doesn't live like we live, because we want our chocolate at a certain price as well. We're not willing to pay like $20 or $30, 30 euros a bar for it. We want it for €3 a bar. And so we're not prepared to even give them a decent wage to do it. But even if we did give them a decent wage to do it, 8 billion people having a small bar of chocolate a day, where is that going to end up? So what I'm suggesting is, yes, why are we doing it? It's because of an addictive need to do it without consideration of love. Now, when there is an addictive need without consideration of love, the very first thing a person would do who loves would stop doing it. They would just stop, and they would feel the reason why they want to do it, why they feel the need. So for example, if I feel the need to have something that I know is damaging to the environment, I've got to make sure that my desire to do it is ethical, or has some balance in it, or has some educational purpose, or has some greater good, other than just, I want a chocolate bar because I need to suppress an emotion. See, it's well known, isn't it, that these substances, alcohol, chocolate, coffee, they affect the transmitters in your brain to make you feel good. So I would ask you, why don't you feel good without them? Now, God created all of the beautiful plants that he created all around the earth, but do you think he created the processes now that we put upon them? It's sort of like, if you look at what's the most abundant sources of food, it's fruit and vegetables. Vegetables are the fastest growing plants generally on the planet, and fruit, 1 tree, thousands of pieces of fruit in 1 year. Same goes with nuts, thousands of pieces of nuts in 1 year. And also they multiply very easily. Often they can be grown from cuttings as well as from, seed. They are by far the most sustainable things that we have. Anything that feeds our addiction becomes a drain on the environment and a drain on society. So how many trees do I have to get rid of to put in a cocoa plantation? How many forests do I need to get rid of to put in my coffee beans? How many? And then when you talk about forest, there's millions of different varieties of animals, birds, creatures, insects, right the way down to plants that I'm clearing en masse in order to feed this addiction. So is this addiction as innocent as I believe it to be? Yep.
Well, yeah, I understand what you're saying about, but there's a big difference between an addiction and the odd cup of coffee or a square of chocolate or whatever. And you don't have to have
I don't agree.
You don't have to have a whole bar of chocolate every day. You might just have 1 or 2 squares, which I do. Normally,
I know that you do, and you're justifying it. I get that. I get the reason for your question, which is the motivation of like this Jesus guy. He's so severe, isn't he? He's saying, I'm not allowed to even have my 2 squares of chocolate a day. Like, how bad is that? And it's like, and the other guy's saying, I just have a little drink, at night before bed or whatever. You're saying I'm not allowed to have, I just have my 1 puff of smoke a day and whatever. And the reality is that when we really want something and we feel we need it, we will justify lots of things for it. And if everyone on the planet has the same justification, large-scale destruction of the planet will occur. Right? So if everyone on the planet has the desire to have as big a house as I have, when I say the biggest house as I have, if I have a double-storey house that's way too big for what I need, if everybody on the planet does that, then at the end of the day, we're going to run out of resources. If everybody on the planet lives like Europeans and Americans and Australians, and the reason why everybody on the planet doesn't is because Europeans, Americans, Australians, the Western cultures have taken and raped the countryside of large-scale populations historically for centuries in order to get what we now have. And we continue to do it. We're taking it out of the ground, we're taking it out of the atmosphere, we're taking it out of the environment, we're polluting the atmosphere at the same time, polluting the environment at the same time. And every single one of us doesn't realise that my little 2 squares of chocolate a day contribute to that. Right? And that's a problem that we don't see that.
Can I say it contributes in more ways than one? Like it contributes in terms of environmental destruction,
yep.
But I sometimes feel even more significantly, it contributes in that it is helping me to deny my pain, helping me to manage or control my experience.
Sometimes we feel it's the only thing we get to enjoy a day.
And in that process, instead of feeling that I don't enjoy my day, we have these little tethering points where we get some comfort.
Yep.
And sometimes it's not even those things you're saying. Sometimes it's bread or, sometimes it's like there's a lot of things we do to kind of, that we consume in this case, or engage our phone or lots of things to avoid this displeasure, this lack of pleasure inside of us. And in doing that, we hold on to the sin that is largely contributing even more to the destruction of our relationships, of our children's condition, of the society we live in.
Our health.
Our relationship with God. So it's a double-edged sword, if you like. One, the environmental destruction is almost an effect of the desire to hold on to the sin that we're managing with the physical substance.
And even in the environmental destruction, how do people who live in those environments eventually end up living? They end up living with dirt floors in shanty towns, working on these farms that we get our daily thing from, and we're not considering love of them either in the process of what we're doing. Yeah. The big companies are making more and more money out of it, and the small people who are doing the actual work are getting poorer and poorer and poorer. Right? You look at how life here is in Europe. You're getting leveraged with your money leveraged on everything you do. Like you can't even wee without having to pay for it. That's bad.
Oh, that's quite good, actually. Okay.
Yeah. Is that better? The light went on, huh? Okay. If we go up the back and then down the front to Julissa. Yeah.
I have a question because you also said tea is also like addiction. I understand that.
Yeah.
But what is when you have a garden and you plant some herbs?
Oh, well, now you're talking about something very different, you see. If I decided I was going to have coffee and I decided I was going to plant a coffee bush in my garden, and it's only one bush in my garden, I've got lots of other bushes and trees and lots of other fruits and vegetables in my garden, and I decided that I was going to beat those beans until I could crush them up and use them and dry them out and use them, and I decided that I was going to do that. Now I think that's a lot more sustainable, isn't it? Isn't that also a lot more loving, because I'm taking responsibility for my addiction?
Oh.
Even if it is an addiction, I'm taking more responsibility for it, right? If I had my cocoa tree in the backyard and I cut off all my cocoa beans and I lay them out and I dry them for 3 weeks and I crush them all up and then I split them all up and then I put them into a paste and a powder and I crush all that up, just like has to happen with my chocolate. It's a whole big process, right? And if I'm willing to do that to get my 1 block of chocolate a year, which is what it would end up with from one tree, And I'm not going to plant en masse a whole great big rows of them and destroy heaps of the environment doing it. It's just going to be in my backyard garden. That's sustainable. And it's also more loving to the people who have to do it for me and they don't have the backyard. It'd be better if they could have a backyard and be able to do the same thing for themselves. Right? It's more sustainable in that regard. So that's more loving. Even if I'm still in addiction, that's more loving than what I'm doing. Does that make sense? So yeah, if you want to have a, tree in your backyard, tea tree, a couple of different varieties even, as long as the birds and the animals and people, and particularly people, are not being treated unlovingly, and the environment's not being treated unlovingly from what you're doing, I don't see any... And it's an occasional thing that you have because you like the taste or whatever else, not because it was an addiction, and you're willing to do it for yourself, just like you're willing to clean up your own poo and wee for yourself whenever you make that, and you're willing to wash your own body for yourself, and you're willing to clean your own house for yourself and all of these kind of things. Well, as long as you're willing to do all of these things that most people view as unpleasant, right? This is why we pay other people to do it, but we pay them nothing to do it, right? Which is not fair. Like, they're doing all these wonderful things for us, all the people who make our flour, all the people who even make our cocoa for our chocolate. They're doing wonderful things for us, but we're not acknowledging or honouring that through the payment of them in a proper wage or a proper lifestyle. We're getting a proper lifestyle for us and we're basically shifting a lot of the responsibility for our desires onto other people, which is an unloving act. So I don't have any problem with you growing a cocoa tree in your backyard or a coffee one for that one, and occasionally having coffee. But do you think one bush of coffee is going to satisfy your coffee need once a day? Because if you look at the process required of how many beans are required and how many beans come off a bush, you'll start seeing, actually, I'm using a lot more than one of those bushes myself a day. We have become even so divorced from the actual processes that create our food and and feed our addictions that we have no idea what's happening. And we like it that way, because if we knew, we'd have to change, and we'd have to go, maybe I should have 1 square a day or none, right? And we'd have to change that, but we don't want to know. And so we don't want to change that. And then we say, my little thing is fine, but would you be prepared to do all of the work for it for yourself, is the question I'm asking you. Because if you're not ethical. And if you're not ethical, you're not loving. It's as simple as that. Right? So if I'm willing to go through planting a plant, not destroying the environment, getting the harvest from that plant, crushing it up, and the same, by the way, applies with flour, bread, and all these other things too, of course, because they all require processes, right? If I'm not willing to do all of those things myself, but I want other people to do it, then I am simply not ethical. I'm requiring somebody else to do something that I'm not willing to do. And a lack of ethics is a lack of love, right? So we find this in the God's Way organisation when we're helping people, right? When people come, there's people who come. I think here you've come, haven't you? There's a few who've come for a few months and everything. And what often happens is a person comes, and we're out in the backyard. When I say backyard, it's 600 acres or whatever. And you're digging holes and by hand, and everyone's going, "Why haven't we got a machine to do this?" It's like, And it's all because we have so much demand that we don't have to be the ones fixing our own damage to the world. And yet, at the same time, we're in the illusion we're creating no damage to the world. And we're creating damage pretty much every day. Like, Mary and I are very aware that every time we buy a bit of tech, we're creating damage to the world. So is the benefit to the world going to be greater than the damage we're creating? It has to be a question we ask ourselves, doesn't it? Yep. So we decided to fly to you guys to talk to you about truth. In that flight, we consumed heaps of carbon. It was all put into the atmosphere. There was a whole heap of things that happened. Mary and I at home, we have a tree planting thing of our own where we do our own carbon offset. Does that make sense? And we do that because we are aware that if we don't do that, we are not taking personal responsibility for the problems we're creating. Right? That's why we do it. That's why we have these environmental programs at home that we spend around about a third of everything we ever do goes towards them so that we can fix and repair damage. Now, a lot of the damage we're also finding in the process, we're fixing and repairing other people's damage as well, which is great because it means that at least there's some righting of the wrongs of the past, right, happening as well. And we're happy to do it because, like, the people who did the wrong of the past, they're now in the spirit world and they can't do it. So the ones of us that are left here, we're the only ones that can do it, right? So we've got to have a different attitude. And if love was driving us, we would have that attitude. But for the most of us, we are in denial and illusion about what is the truth about these matters. And we like the illusion, we like the denial because the denial lets us keep doing what we want, what we think we need. So we like it. And we're not admitting to ourselves we like it. Right? And to actually make some sincere change and become sincere people, and even, if you think about it, to have a relationship with God, I'm going to have to get out of my illusion and get out of my denial about it. Yeah? So what I've found personally is the more I progress and the more love I receive from God, the less I feel like having coffee. Or when I was doing computer work, you imagine we used to have a lot of very long hours in computer work. You know, I used to have 4 cups of coffee a day at least, and I'd be wired, you know, like doing, you know, there are times where I would stay up 4 days straight without sleep. Now, what do you think kept me awake? Coffee, right? So I've been there. I know all about the whole addiction thing and the purpose of it and why we would do things, right? But I found that as I grow in love, and I, in particular, release certain emotions, the desire for these things just drops away. It's no longer there, right?
Yeah,
So,
and I think that's a very important point because the problem is when we speak about these physical things, Jesus often speaks about the physical things because they're very tangible and it's like a way to give a concrete example. But the problem is now, say you all go home, no one ever touches coffee, tea or chocolate ever again. Have you grown spiritually? No.
well, hang on a sec, though.
Oh, you've grown in your ethics?
Certainly grown in your ethics.
Perhaps, but you have to
But also, hang on a sec, though.
Yeah.
It's going to challenge some emotion.
Yes, but what are you going to do with that?
What are you going to do with that, though, is what Mary's pointing out.
Yes, preventing the action is not going to do anything unless you're humble in the process.
But also, this is true. If you keep feeding an addiction, do you think that the addiction is going to give itself up?
No.
You know, any smoker who's a smoker who's trying to give up knows that if they keep the cigarettes in their pocket while they're trying to give up smoking, it's not going to work very well. Isn't that true? Right? So the problem for many of us is we say, oh, but it's only a little bit of addiction. And maybe if I process an emotion first, then I'll give up the addiction. No, if you know you have an addiction and you know it's unethical to continue it, then why aren't you doing it right now?
Yeah.
Right? The reason why you're not doing it right now is emotional. It's a sin, which is an emotion that exists in you in disharmony with love, and you want to leave it there. You want to act upon it. You want to keep it there. You don't want to do anything about that particular feeling. So, you know, when we talk about like coffee, for example, coffee gives you something. It gives you something you're missing in your life. That's why you need a cup of coffee, because it gives you something. Like the only thing now I drink is water. There was a time when I was in my early 20s, I only drank Coke. I did that for nearly a year. You know, Coke was cheap. Like, you know, in Australia, it comes in 600 milliliter or 1 litre cans, not 330 litre cans or milliliter cans like it does here. So it's like jumbo size. And so, you know, and you buy a carton of them, of 24 or 32 for like $12. Cheaper than water. Cheaper than bottled water. And I find that interesting. Like, Coke is mostly water with other things mixed in, and yet water is more expensive. And I go, there's something wrong here, right? Something that feeds more addiction is more expensive, is cheaper than something that doesn't feed addiction and is more pure. And this thing is actually made of that thing, and yet it's cheaper. How does that work? Like, there's something wrong there, right? But anyway, so I used to drink this Coke, and after nearly 2 years of drinking Coke like that, I started coughing up chunks of phlegm all the time, and in the morning I'd be in the shower and I'd be coughing, and all this phlegm would come out and everything. Like, my body was telling me, you're way, way wrong here, right? Anyway, gave it up. I didn't deal with any emotion. Not at that time. Now when I even smell Coke, it's like, it's a drug. That's why it's a popular drug, of course. Of course, the very first part of that drug was made out of poppy seeds, wasn't it? Or what was it made out of first?
Cocoa.
No, the cocaine. Yeah.
Cocaine.
Yeah, the leaf of the cocaine plant.
Yeah, leaf of the cocaine plant. Yeah. So, yeah, I can sort of understand that. That's how it felt for me, anyway. At the time. But I was in denial and illusion, and my pain, the pain, caught up with me. And the pain said, stop. And so I stopped. You can stop and make some spiritual progress. Of course, if you don't, as Mary said, deal with the emotional driving force, it's going to be harder to stop. And it's also, you're not going to make further progress than just making an ethical decision. But you can still make an ethical decision, right? And when you do, emotions come up. Like, I started feeling why I needed it. It was all about, sugar comfort, And once I realised that, I started dealing with some emotions about it. Why I needed that level of sugar comfort in my life, Yeah. Julius?
May we have a toilet break before I ask the question?
No. No.
I'm dying.
Yeah, you're dying. Yeah. Let's have a toilet break and we'll continue.